So the American elm of today in most areas is simply a seedling. They reach maturity to the level where they can produce seeds, and the seeds are viable. So you see elm trees like this that are really more like shrubs. They enter shrub borders, and this is the American elm of today. The American elm that we're about to see is much bigger. But it was once an iconic tree up and down the streets of most of the cities in the Midwest. This tree is, I have to say, I can't recall seeing an elm tree this big. I was just shocked when I saw it.
I'm never shocked when we have to stop the car abruptly because Bob sees a tree in someone's yard, behind a business, and we have to get out and sneak in.
It's important. So last November I was in town. We were driving back from my mom's to Patty's, and I just saw this massive American elm tree. It's an unmistakable shape and bark, and I just said, stop. That's a huge American elm. It shouldn't be here. How did you survive this entire blight? And so not only is it a beautiful tree, but it's a survivor tree, so it's important.
The reason that I got pulled into the love of trees like my brother is not that he pointed it out. Like I said, it's not a maple, it's not an ash. He told the whole story, or he tells the whole story. That's what makes me remember what that tree is, not just the look or the bark. I get the whole story, and that's, I feel very lucky and fortunate that I get that. I get to pick his knowledge.
Trees have histories.
Yes, and so do we.
I feel like I have a responsibility. I learned these trees because I love the trees. I learned their histories. When you get to know something, like people or trees, you don't want to lose them.
The youngest that I can remember, I remember the streets just being lined with trees.
Massive elm trees. The trees were tall enough that the trees from one side of the street touched the other side of the street, and you had basically a tunnel. In the 60s, we started seeing those trees come down in other areas when we drive around town, and it transformed the look of the city. I remember I was affected by that.
In the 1950s, the city actually maintained more than 100,000 American elm trees along the streets. Unfortunately, at that time, Dutch elm disease arrived. And Dutch elm disease is this exotic, very deadly fungal disease that attacked American elms. There was no good management tools for the city of Milwaukee to use to treat the trees. And so they had to start cutting them down on an unbelievable scale. And as you could imagine, that had a massive effect reducing the canopy cover not only in the city, but especially along streets.
We were excited when they came to cut down our trees because we thought it's our turn. We're going to get to see these large trees being taken down. And my reaction to that after being so excited that they were coming to cut the trees down was just, there's nothing here anymore. So it was impactful, and I became more oriented towards urban forestry for that reason. So I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I ended up in the horticulture program with a focus on trees. I also studied in the botany program, focus on trees, and plant pathology, focus on trees. When I was in college, I'd come home on the weekends and I didn't have a car, and I'd say, hey, who wants to take a drive? And we would go to parks and arboretums. We would go out looking at trees together. And we would do it sort of in a pack. It would be my brother John, who's no longer with us, and Patty and myself.
Johnny loved to go and measure trees with you. He wanted to get in one of the books. He wanted to find the biggest tree in Milwaukee. He was so excited about that. It was great. Yeah. It was great.
Patty and I have been looking at these trees for many years. But before Patty and I, it was John and I, my youngest brother. And when we lost John, it was almost difficult to come back and look at the trees for a while, because I remembered the jokes and the kidding around and just all the personal stuff. And you know what's really funny about all this is when I come back to Milwaukee and I see these trees, I feel like I'm missing somebody. I really do. And I don't think about him as much when I see trees around the country, but these were what we would call our stomping grounds.
It does. It smells like brown sugar. Katsura tree.
That's a Katsura tree. They're fairly ubiquitous in Seattle area, and we'll look at some in Kenosha that are planted by me 42 years ago, but I wouldn't use them as a street tree now that I know them better. I only read about them. It's a gorgeous tree. This is Katsura, Circidophyllum japonicum, and what I was showing my sister was that when the foliage drops in the fall, it smells like burnt sugar. Isn't that cool?
I'm gonna let you try it too. There you
Oh,
go.
he's filming.
That's okay. I don't care.
So I was an undergraduate student at the university, and my major professor, Dr. Hasselkiss, I was in his office one day and he said, hey, there's a job down in Kenosha, Wisconsin for the park system. I think you should just go down for the experience of having the interview. A week later, I remember getting a call that I had the job. And so my job was to get the right trees in the right spots, to go back in where the elms had been. So for me, this was like a nirvana moment. Like, I've got this job and I get to replant where the dead elms were. Oh yeah, you can smell that. These are Amur cork trees. The botanical name is, with a PH, Philodendron amurensis, from the Amur River region of China. Yeah, a little sponge, not much. So, Amur cork tree, this tree would be roughly 50 years old, planted 42 years ago. And we probably have a 50-foot mature tree. I would qualify this one as a success. These people take care of their trees. So this is a yellowwood tree. The botanical name for yellowwood is Cladrastis kentuckea. We didn't get many of them, but this one clearly seemed to do well. It didn't get to be a big tree, but it flowers every other year. It's not too messy, and the foliage is still held up. We were talking to the neighbors across the street, and they said they had many days in the hundreds this year. So I would say this tree is pretty tough. Probably have not been back here for 20 years. So for me, it feels fantastic to come back and still see hundreds of these trees thriving. It's very rewarding, I have to say that.
So here today we are measuring an American elm tree that could very well be the largest American elm in the state of Wisconsin. So this is part of our Champion Tree program, and that program is kind of a documentation and celebration of the largest trees of individual species.
So for me with this tree, having the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources come out to look at the tree and measure the tree is sort of a dream come true. You find these trees and you know how significant they are, that they've survived, somehow withstood this disease, so they've shown that they have resistance. It's less about just this one tree. This is really about balance in nature, where we can bring a tree like the American elm back, or reintroduce resistant trees back into the breeding programs to return this tree back to the natural environment and the street tree environment too.
I used to live in this neighborhood and I would walk by this tree potentially a few times a week, and it's awe-inspiring, truly. When I heard about Bob and nominating this tree, it's like, oh, I know that tree. I know that tree intimately, like a lot of people in this neighborhood do.
I'm Liz. I've lived here since 1987. So this tree has seen many hugs and kisses from people walking the neighborhood.
It's my favorite tree. It's so beautiful. It just makes the neighborhood so wonderful, and it just shows so much life and growth, and yeah, I agree, buddy. It's a good tree, isn't it?
I wouldn't give this tree up for anything. Regardless of the roots problems I had, it's such a gorgeous part of nature. It's like having a home from Gaia. It's a gift.
So it was really kind of inspiring that we just had a resident from down the street stop by and tell us that they moved here to be close to this tree. But I think we're getting that kind of effect as people stop and see what we're doing. They're saying, that's my favorite tree.
And as we've been chatting, I could see people crossing the street, walking down the sidewalk, and they're looking at us, and then they're looking up. We need people to support trees. We need people to support tree programs. We need people to, to speak for them. The responsibility and the privilege of promoting and protecting and planting trees mostly falls on people like Bob and Patty, on every resident of this street and every resident of every street in Wisconsin.
When I'm back here in Milwaukee and I'm looking for trees, I'm reconnected to the brother I lost. I feel like we're continuing some of the work that we started in his interest. I would encourage people to get out there and see if you can make your contribution, because we need more people out there looking for these trees and ways to get them back into nature faster. So find the foliage, take pictures, get close-ups of the limbs and the bark, and send it to somebody who might know. Contact the agencies that you have in your city and state, like the Department of Natural Resources. There is somebody out there who's interested in this, and they want to hear from people like us. So don't be afraid to speak up and let them know what you find. Good luck, good tree hunting. It's one of those things that we're never bored with. My wife is very engaged in this. It's soaked into the blood of our children, where initially they thought it was boring and now they send me pictures of trees. Can you tell me what this is, Dad? For us, it'll be a lifetime passion, because what's better than going to a beautiful botanical garden, a beautiful arboretum, and just spending your time in nature, whether it's in the city or whether it's in the countryside. So we love it. I guess you could call me a tree hunter. I'm still a tree hunter. I'll never stop doing it.